Thank you all of you for being here. It's very kind of you to get away from home early on a Sunday morning. Not the easiest things to do. I'm very excited to be in this panel for many reasons. The main ones being, of course, that these are all friends of mine. Four of us have worked together at various times in various organizations. And Shehan has been an old friend. And recently, I believe he won some prize or the other. And that's a real honor.
It wasn't the World Cup.
Yeah, yeah, it wasn't the World Cup. Lovely. So yes, the topic we are discussing is cricket writing. And what about cricket writing? And I think one of the things that we need to talk about is, does cricket writing exist today? We've all been around a few years, and when we started out, cricket writing was the sort of hottest thing in sports journalism. It meant that you could write, hopefully, literary stuff. You could write purple prose. You could write wonderful stuff, wonderful language that would not get into the rest of the newspaper, because the rest of the newspaper was very, very sober and very severe. So when I started out in journalism here in Bangalore, in Deccan Herald, there was a gentleman called Rajan Bala who was the sports editor, and I joined the organization. And one of the first things I asked him was, can I smoke in the office? Is it allowed to smoke in the office? And he told me, so long as you don't fuck on my table, you can do what you want. And that is really the essence of sports journalism. So long as we can do what we want, so long as we don't do that one thing. So welcome to all of you here. I'll start with Kaushik, mainly because he's sitting closest to me, and also because Kaushik has reported 100 test matches, which means that he's been around a bit. He's seen it happen from the time when we used to rely on telex machines and fax machines till today, when things are so much easier and you have all kinds of communication help. So those are the obvious changes in the technology is the obvious change in cricket writing. But over this time, what do you see as the couple of most important changes that have taken place?
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Suresh. I think, like you said, the obvious one is technology and the ease with which you can communicate now in terms of having access to email. We didn't even know, right, what email was and what we relied on fax and telex and carried this bulky computers, typewriters around. And I feel that in a lot of ways, that grounding sort of helped us, because you had the story in your mind before you got down to writing, right? There was no Control X, there was no backspace. And if you're outside of India, not in the subcontinent, then you're always battling a deadline. So essentially, you were thinking about the story before you wrote the story. Now, you see people who start writing and then they pause and they go for a walk and the smoke that you're talking about, and then they come back, and you can transpose, you can take this, and all that was not there, which is, I'm not saying it's a good thing or it's a bad thing, it's just a different thing, right? And I think the biggest change that I would say, which I perhaps feel has impacted cricket writing not so favorably, is the lack of focus on domestic cricket. You know, we keep talking about players not playing domestic cricket because of workload. Unfortunately, organizations don't seem to be as invested in Ranji Trophy, for instance, as it used to be at one point, where we used to travel. Whenever Karnataka played Ranji Trophy, we used to travel the length and breadth of India, and we used to watch matches. So you had an understanding of cricket. You could go and talk to the players if you didn't understand stuff, and you formed a relationship over a period of time, which was not just based on need. It's not like, I want something from you, so I want you to be my friend. So you had a better understanding of cricket. And I think it's a big disconnect there between the player and the journalist or the writer, whatever, however you want to put it. I think that is to the detriment of cricket writing. It's to the detriment of relationship between players and journalists. Obviously, our numbers are much more than what they were when we started out. But it is difficult to form those kind of relationships, I think, now, compared to when we started out and when we had access to the players.
I suspect that when all of us came into the profession, and I suspect that if there had been a similar gathering, I suspect that our seniors would have said that this is terrible, things aren't what they used to be. These youngsters, you know, that sort of thing. And a lot of us feel that way, and I don't know if it's a function of time or if it's something that is sort of intrinsic to the profession itself. Uh, Pradeep, you've been obviously around as long as the rest of us have, and do you think that's an important element in this? What I think, I mean, if you agree with me, first of all, that people don't read cricket reports anymore, people don't read about cricket anymore. They'd much rather take it in from other sources on television or the net or whatever. Do you think that it still makes a difference if you're a good writer on the game?
Well, I think obviously things have changed. Television live coverage has changed the way people watch cricket. In our times when we started, what we wrote was what happened on the ground, regardless of what happened out there. Because people had no, except for a few thousands who would watch the matches live at ground, they had no idea what was happening. So whether you were good or bad, if you wrote a good copy, if the language was good, if it was readable, forget what happened or not happened, people would read it and say, yes, this is what they have seen. Now we have to accept the fact that people are watching, and people who write now, it started from our time only, in, I think, early 90s when Test cricket, international cricket became live on television, that we were worried that what we write now has to be carefully written because people have already watched the game. So that put a lot of pressure on a lot of people. I think uh, a lot of people were recognized by readers that they know their game, they write well, but they also know what is happening. A lot of people who didn't know, I mean, there were a lot of people who weren't that much aware of the technical nuances of the game. So they got exposed. Today now, since people are watching so much, do they need to read next day? I mean, that's also a question. Would they want to read a match report of something which has already happened? And if they would want to read it, are there people with that kind of an ability to get the reader's attention despite the fact that he has watched? And when he reads the match report or reads the next day's report, he says, oh, I missed out on these details. I wasn't aware, despite the fact that he has watched it. So I think, it's very important. It's more challenging now to be a cricket journalist than it was during my time. It's far more challenging now. We might say, unfortunately, newspapers don't provide that kind of a space for cricket writing that they used to do in our times. We used to write half-page match reports, Suresh. Like 2,000-word reports we used to write. Now, later when I became the sports editor, when you became the sports editor, it got reduced from 2,000 to 1,500. Now it's what, 250 words, 300 words. So obviously the whole writing skills have changed. The way journalists or papers see at the sport, they see it as a revenue-making avenue. They don't see it any longer as a sport which thrills people, or it's a leisurely activity. No, it's a money-making ability. So I guess with these changes, becoming a journalist itself is far more difficult task, and I don't envy. When I see a young man wanting to become a cricket writer, I wonder, will he survive? What will he do?
Well, I take your point. I feel that if you're a good writer, and okay, there is a problem of the word count, but I feel that if you're a good writer, you would still be able to draw the reader despite the reader having watched the game. I mean, for example, personally, I would happily read a match report by someone like Gideon Haigh, although I would have seen the match, or Mike Atherton, although I would have seen the match. There is a obvious shift in emphasis, if you agree with me, Sharda. There's an obvious shift in emphasis from a sort of match report, for example. I mean, for the moment, we'll stick to match reports, which were richly detailed and which had a lot of human interest and that sort of thing, into something that is a very sort of is shorn of all these so-called things that are not relevant to the scores themselves. And obviously that's not a good thing. So is that the way out of the problem that Pradeep was discussing? The way out of, because a lot of, a lot of, a lot of the sort of ills, let's say, are also caused by editors. For example, when we started out, we were told very specifically not to attend player press conferences. They said, you have watched the match, you please write about it. We don't want to know what XYZ thought about it, because it's not, they're not going to say anything intelligent or interesting. But now there is a great deal of focus on that. So I'm asking you about the question of emphasis, the change in emphasis in cricket reporting.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is sounding like a very sort of sad discussion where all of us old people are saying, "Oh, this is very bad." But like Pradeep said, that you almost worry for people who said, "I want to become a cricket writer, journalist, reporter, whatever." The emphasis is changing not merely in the fact that, say, a newspaper report or a match day report is being stripped of a certain amount of details. It's being turned into almost like a data sort of a source, particularly that you're seeing a lot more of 2020 coverage. There's a lot more emphasis, say, on the statistics that come out of the game, that people are making references to, very fine statistical models and sort of information that you're getting about various aspects of the game, which are even more detailed because of the fact that those numbers and that analysis has been done. So there is an emphasis on that as well, is what you see. Do people want to read a match report? I feel that if it's a great day, I'm a big champion of the written word, because that is the only thing I do other than speaking. Because I think that when you want to put history down on paper, what happens in a cricket match, you can see it on television, but only a person who writes can tell you what it felt like. And to remember what it felt like is to go back into time. And I think that we should not lose that. Our editors or people that are there, they should not lose the sense of giving, a power to their writers and their journalists and their reporters to say, no, write it like this. Tell us what it felt like. Because the numbers will not tell you what it felt like. Television will be screaming and shouting, but it will not tell you what it felt like for you, the sort of neutral watcher. So the writer or the journalist or the reporter is the neutral watcher. I would say that the emphasis has shifted. It's become more almost hard-boiled in a way. But the power of the written word should not, you shouldn't give it away. You shouldn't let it go. There should be a certain amount of, I think, even a human error or two or whatever should be allowed to exist there, because of the fact that it was like that. I remember, this is one of my favorite things, and I grumble about it all the time. I'll say it very quickly, like, you're not going to remember the careers of Rohit Sharma or MS Dhoni or any of the, not MS Dhoni, say Rohit Sharma, look at by their Instagram tweets, you're not going to remember it through that. You'll remember it for what was written about them, rather than anyone saying that, oh, he was a fantastic batsman about 500 times every day in TV promos,
That's absolutely true. I mean, one of my favorite lines about Vivian Richards in the old days when he was playing was that somebody wrote, and I don't even remember who it was. He said he got his eye in with the kind of strokes that an average batsman never produces in a lifetime. I remember that. I have no idea what Viv Richards' average is in Test cricket.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in here and say that. So Ayaz wrote a line about Tendulkar when he hit his first Test century, and the team was in like absolute crap. They were playing very badly, and so the first line of his report was, "The illumination of the crescent hit the dark side of the moon." So I still remember it, and we remember he came off the wicket like the crack of doom. We remember those words. You would hope that people would be reading to remember them from now on.
No, that's true. Which brings me to Shehan. Now, for many years, for many decades actually, it was sort of accepted that the finest cricket novel or novel on cricket was written by a gentleman called Hugh de Selincourt, who wrote a book called The Cricket Match. And it gained by repetition. Every generation said this was the greatest, this was the greatest. I personally was not very fond of that book, but that didn't matter. This was the accepted sort of wisdom then. And then Shehan wrote Chinaman, and it is such an incredible novel. I thought it was the great Sri Lankan novel. I think I wrote somewhere that this is the great Sri Lankan novel. Until, of course, he wrote a second book, which is now the, I don't know, either the greater Sri Lankan novel or now the great Sri Lankan novel. But the point about Chinaman is that it is a novel about a very simple thing, looking for a former player. But it's also about a whole lot of other things, you know, a whole lot of the country and the troubles it went through and the joy and the happiness. So I want to ask you, Shehan, you heard these four sort of, as Sharda said, old people raving about, you know, how good times were in our day. But I think you can sort of bring in the balance now and tell us about how you see this without having to. You have the advantage of not doing daily reporting, which is our disadvantage.
Well, firstly, what a pleasure it is to be talking about cricket again. I've been talking about corpses and ghosts for the last month. So, and in fact, I mean, I decided to write the second book because I was a bit tired of talking about cricket because I'm the odd one out on this stage. I'm not a cricket writer. I'm not a cricket expert. But also, I think, I don't write about cricket. I write about cricket writers. That Chinaman was supposed to be about a great cricketer, a forgotten cricketer, a genius cricketer. But I ended up writing about a poor, underappreciated cricket writer, and that was much more fascinating. And as someone who's spent time with both tribes, I can say, cricket writers are far more interesting and fascinating than cricketers themselves. I like that. This is true. And so I do disagree with everything said because I find myself, I read more about cricket than I actually watch matches. I'd be following the cricket info, I'd be following the ball by ball. I don't have that much time to watch matches, and sometimes I find the writing more engaging than the actual match. And so I mean, let me give you one example. On a Sunday afternoon, like one we're about to have, you'd have a nice lunch and you'd sit down and watch some cricket, usually a test match. I mean, you can't avoid T20, but I like watching test cricket. And I'll sit there and after lunch session, perhaps nothing will happen, Bowler bowls, batsman leaves, bowler bowls, batsman blocks, and you get that for 3 hours. And you end up, you've had a good lunch, you fall asleep. And then you wake up for the tea break and the analysis. And there are pundits like the eminent writers that I'm sharing the stage with sitting there. And they'll be talking like, oh, what an absorbing battle that was between willow and leather, between old ideas and new, between this was really a battle of philosophy over. And you sit there and they're analyzing it like it was an act in a epic Greek tragedy or comedy. And you sit up thinking, yeah, that was pretty epic, watching that guy block for 3 hours. Yeah, and you think that bit that I was snoring through, I'm glad that I was sitting on this couch. And you end up following the game for 5 days and it ends up as a draw, but you don't feel like you wasted your time. But I think what you guys do is what novelists do. You all are writing mythologies, you all are writing narratives. Because, okay, let me give you one uncomfortable truth is that most matches are pointless and meaningless. That is, okay, now we're in a football World Cup, so every match has tremendous meaning. But, so I support Newcastle United, and I have sat up at 2 in the morning watching Newcastle draw against Watford, nil all. And you're at your desk on Monday morning thinking, what the hell did I do? But then you read the report, and they are talking about that 1 point was crucial for Watford's relegation battle. Newcastle defense was tested. Who will they buy? And suddenly they're talking about commas and how much they're going to spend. And even this boring passage, cricket writers talking about physics, how the ball behaved and how the pitch behaved, and physics and agriculture. So I think this is why you guys are awesome. And I think you shouldn't. Cricket writing is a wonderful thing. And so I asked Andrew Fidel Fernando, my friend, the great Sri Lankan cricket writer, how do you do it, man? How do you watch Sri Lanka lose in embarrassing fashions week in, week out, but somehow he mines poetry and comedy and pathos from that? And, recently, we lost to Afghanistan, and I think, but still, I read the report. I don't watch the match. I turn off the match when it gets depressing, but I'll read Fidel's report because there'll be something there I can latch onto. So I think you're all being too hard on yourselves. I think cricket writing is alive and well. The only thing I would say is, I guess now anyone with a Twitter account or a blog is a cricket writer. So therefore you're competing against that. But I don't see any competition really. I think the finest cricket writing is up there with the finest literary writing, any writing.
Yes, I agree with you that not just cricket, but I think sport is the most significant thing we do in our lives, which is meaningless. And once you get that clear in your head, then you can understand and you can appreciate the non-happenings that are so much a part of cricket. I mean, in a 90-minute football game, for example, the average player is out of the game for about 80 minutes, if not more. And so the whole idea of sport is a team sport, of course, is that you're playing a supporting role for 80 minutes of the time or 85 minutes of the time, and then you have that crucial, main role, and that's when you win or lose, your character is revealed, all those wonderful things that sports does. The significant thing, the important thing really from the fact that we've only been discussing one aspect of cricket writing, which is cricket writing a daily newspaper or magazine cricket writing. I have been thinking, and I'm sure others have too. I mean, Ram Guha is here, who's probably the only Indian who's got an actual oeuvre on the game, who's actually written books on the game, a number of books on the game. And it has always seemed to me unreal and not quite right that with so many good writers, and I think in recent years, India has certainly produced some of the finest writers in the game. And with that, there's nobody who's spent the time and effort to actually sit down and write a book. Of course, Pradeep has written a book. Sharda and I are always fighting about Sharda not writing a book. And it's been something that seems to be strange. Is there something about doing a book that requires something different from all these things that we've been talking about? Shehan.
I wrote a novel, writing a book about cricket,
like a non-fiction,
like a proper. So this is one thing that struck me when I came up with this idea, and because there's an abundance of cricket writing. There's the zen of cricket, the sociology of cricket. There's all aspects. There's many sporting biographies, but why hasn't there been a fictional? And Ted Dexter wrote one, right? Testicle, yes. Testicle,
yeah.
And Mark C. But there was and P.G. Wodehouse wrote it, but
early
whether
days,
they were cricket novels or not. So that was one thing that struck me, that I thought someone should do this, someone should write this. And then I waited many years and I thought no one's going to write a book about a left-arm leg spinner. But certainly, so growing up, so it's me and my brother and father, and he was a father of that generation, not hands-on, basically. I never left your mother, so what more do you want from me? that kind of father. But we would only bond over cricket. And so we had a vast life. And so Christmas presents, birthday presents were cricket books. And that was the research for this. I didn't, apart from hanging out with, interviewing boring cricketers and interesting cricket writers, I had this library. And those books are still valued. And I think it is such a vast canvas. You can write straight match reports. But I think that you can bring whatever you want to that game, and I think, that's what I tried to do with Chinaman, but the famous, obvious example, C.L.R. James, how he used cricket to talk about a nation building, and I think it's been done since. So, yeah, the match report is one thing, and then the creative match report where you find the poetry in the game, but I think the book is still the ultimate form, and I believe there's still a huge market for cricket fiction, and it's still, cricket fiction, cricket writing in general.
Yeah, I think there's room for cricket writing in fiction. There's room for, cricket is a game with enormous humor. I think it's a very funny sport. You adopt some really weird poses. You do all kinds of weird things. If you look, the bowler, for example, he comes running this way, then he suddenly has to go sideways, then he finishes like this. There's something quite weird about all these physical movements in cricket. But nobody has really written, I suspect that you need to be outside of this fraternity to be able to detect that and to be able to comment on that aspect, of cricket. This was fiction. What I want to ask you, Sharda, since you refuse to write a book, is why is it that cricket writers in India, some very fine ones, do not have, have not written books, and we do not have sort of, you know, top writers having written books.
I can't sort of speak for everybody. So, I mean, the publishing industry in India was also at a very nascent stage. In, say, before Ram's book that came out, Spin and Other Turns. And it sort of boomed and grown from there. You'll be surprised to see the number of books there are on cricket. I'm not saying they're a high quality or whatever.
Sorry, I'm saying good books.
Yeah, there are stacks of them. I think it's also a question of where people are at their careers, what they are interested about, what are the subjects they want to get into. So Ayush's book on the Pakistan women's team is just outstanding. And it's like the next generation, maybe not ours, because we are the typewriter and the fax people. But I think the younger generation that is there will see a range of things that are there for them to do, and there will be people there who will be willing to publish it. It's almost, now I'm thinking about it, it's almost like a strange situation that while the great writing may go out of the daily reporting and the 2020 sort of non-stop assembly line of matches that are going to be, and they're only going to increase, I think maybe there are these writers will have a chance to do other things with the sport. Maybe cricket fiction even. So there's that very fantastic book on Sherlock Holmes and the Birth of the Ashes. Right, so you're seeing younger people do much more interesting work of different ranges and different topics and subjects, and maybe this is the time for the literature of cricket to increase in quality and in quantity than it was for us. I mean, we were too busy telling the stories of our heroes whom you could reach, right? Are reachable heroes. Now the heroes are unreachable. So you tell the other stories that's there. That's my excuse. I don't know. So Pradeep's written books. So
Pradeep's written books, and I mean the recent book you wrote on where you brought in autobiography and cricket and meshed it together beautifully. I think is an excellent read, and I think it's the kind of thing that cries out to be written. How did that come about? How did the concept come about? That, because that's not something that happens, sitting in the press box.
Well, maybe I had aged, and I was looking back at, as Shehan beautifully put it, it's a meaningless activity, and yet we take it so seriously. People get so much involved. If your team loses match, they start crying. They are so upset as if some big tragedy has happened. We in the press box used to sit so seriously. If you miss a ball, somebody is like disturbed you, you start screaming at him. You didn't allow me to watch it. I think I guess in later ages I realized, and cricket is not just, or sport is not just played at the ground. There are so many other aspects to it. There are human beings playing it. There's so much of unpredictability involved. And there are so many other social issues which are in the background of the event taking place. I thought since my own life, I was in Kashmir I'm a Kashmiri, so it's a conflict zone. I lived in Punjab during terrorism. There were a lot of things happening which impacted me, like it must have impacted all of us. So I thought I had a story to say. So I would combine a middle-class boy, I represent that, who sees things, who learns on the job, who realizes the world is not what he was taught in the school or in colleges. The world out there is different. And I had those experiences of cricket, like covering international cricket, knowing players, knowing a lot of inside stories. I thought I'll combine them, and it happened. Ram is there. Ram, I think, was an inspiration for this, and he's part of a foundation which accepted my proposal. and the book.
Excellent. Uh, apart from covering 100 test matches, Kaushik, the fact is that you uh, were also certainly the first, and I don't know if the only man to have seen India win a test match in every single country in the world. And I remember when that happened, when we talked about it some years ago, I kept pushing you to do a book. And that didn't happen, and you have written two other books subsequently. But these are books that were written for other cricketers like VVS Lakshman and J.R. Vishwanath. How does that writing differ from all the writing that we've been talking about?
Yeah, first up, I think one of the reasons we spoke about lack of enough cricket books, right? And I think when you're working, for instance, then you're caught up in this whole 9 to 5 or 4 to midnight shifts. And yes, if you can find the time, but I suppose the demands that organizations place on journalists now are a lot more than when we were in our peak, when we were younger guys, and now we have production.
I thought we were still in our peak.
Yeah, well, you know what I mean, right? So we only had to write, right? And somebody would make the page. Now you have to, now if you're digital, then you have to make the e-paper, and you have to size the pictures, and you have to do the uploading, and you have to do the tagging, and you have to do the social media. So I think the demands on the people who are in the profession now are a lot more than the demands, because social media didn't exist, and we didn't have any of these e-paper, and you didn't have the websites. So I think that is something that takes a lot out of people mentally. That could be a reason. I'm not saying that is the reason. Coming back to these books, where I think when we write our pieces, whether it is a match report or a feature, then you take, how do I put it, full responsibility for what you're writing, because it's your name, right? But I think when you're writing somebody else's book, you're even more careful, because while it is that person's name, while it is Lakshman's name or while it is Vishi sir's name, your name is also associated with it, and you would feel that if something is not good, then it's your fault, it's not their fault, right? If it's a good book, then obviously it is their book, right? But if it's not a good book, then it's your book, right? Which is, I think, the basic premise of how I approach these books. So I felt a greater responsibility in not letting them down. I thought it was a great sort of honor for me to be picked by all these geniuses to do their work, and so it was like, it was up to me to make sure that I didn't let them down, and I didn't create this false impression of what they were not, what they are not. So it's a bit more of a challenge, and I think if we do have egos, which I suspect we all do, then it's we need to sort of subjugate that and ensure that it's not your voice, you're not showing off what you know, but it's trying to project what they are speaking. Because if you read the book, then you'd rather people think, oh yes, in this context, this is what Vishi sir would have said, and this is how he would have, he'd have noticed the twinkle in his eye and stuff. So then you feel greater sense of accountability, I suppose, more than responsibility. And when that comes out reasonably well, then I think there's a greater sense of satisfaction than anything that you have written, or at least that's the way I look at it.
Excellent. Yes, I get exactly what you mean. Do we have time to take a few questions?
Yeah. Suresh, I'd just like to make one.
I'll just. Excellent. We've got time to take questions. I'd love to hear what.
Suresh, can I just make one last comment?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, Shehan.
No, I mean, I think because this game, there's vast periods where not much happens. So there's that room for this contemplation and for looking at the narrative beyond the narrative, and looking at the twinkle in the eye and so on. But also I think, I mean, though we say it's meaningless, and this is also something I tried to capture in the book, it was, conflict zones, when Pradeep was talking about Kashmir, and certainly Sri Lanka. I mean, Chinaman was about basically me and my father bonding over 1996 to 1999 was the time I had the most to talk to with my dad, and vice versa, and how cricket forged that relationship. But also, we were in the throes of a war then, and recently we had our power crisis and our economic crisis, but Australia toured. and they played in a floodlit stadium when people have like 16-hour power cuts. I think the ICC probably footed the bill for that. But being in those games, it was such a wonderful atmosphere. And I think the team also rose and they ended up winning that series. But to talk to the people who, and in Sri Lanka, even the team's losing, there's no power, there's no gas, the Papare band is playing, and there is that joyous activity. But just talking to the people saying, look, we go home now, there'll be no buses, we got to walk, and there's no power at home, kids' school, all that. But for this moment, you know, it's a glory. So I think even though it's meaningless, there is meaning and there is value to this, and that's what I think cricket writers can capture.
Wonderful. I really appreciate that. I think it's true to say that. I mean, for example, in the World Cup, I just saw the England coach saying that if England wins the World Cup, it'll do wonders to a country that's going through such, you know, such a slide. And that's true. I mean, Argentina won in '78 when they were in the doldrums, and there's a whole lot of sporting history is full of such.
And the
such
Afghanistan cricket team, which is
Afghanistan cricket team,
quite a formidable
absolutely.
outfit.
It's a wonderful thing. Yes. Yes. So I saw a hand there for questions. Yes, please.
So the atmosphere in our house in the morning is the same as when I was a child. My kids, 11 and 14, they're snatching the newspaper to catch on the sports column before they leave. They read Sports Star cover to cover. So I would really like to hear some reflections, some words of inspiration for the next generation writers.
Oh, I think the next generation writers, as some of us pointed out here, are excellent. I mean, the younger writers have. See, we went through a transition. We had to go through a period when journalism itself, the mechanics of journalism was completely different. I mean, it was you know, papers were made on stone, and you know, we used telex and fax, etc., to report and that sort of thing. This new generation doesn't have to worry about all that. I mean, if you were reporting from England or South Africa, as I think all of us have done, it's a terrible thing because, you know, the time difference is against you, and, you know, you have to do all kinds of, work all kinds of magic to ensure that your report went ahead of the guy sitting. Yeah, I mean, you might be his great friend. I might be Kaushik's great friend through 23 hours of the day. But in the 24th hour, I might even trip him on the way to the telex room because I need to get there first, you see? So that part of it is over now. And I think the younger generation, if they even think about it, I don't think it affects them at all. So the mechanics has been the problems of the mechanics has been ruled out, and now we're looking at pure words. I mean, that's really the way I see it, and I think the doom and gloom is mainly from our side. The doom and gloom is not from the side of the fan or the customer, because the fan gets what he wants, whether he gets it from the printed word or from television or from any other social media. For the fan, that's complete in itself. So the doom and gloom is not essentially about the game itself. It's about or the reception of the game. It's about the sort of production of its narrative from our side. So yes, I think cricket writing is cricket is very much alive. Obviously, cricket writing is very much alive, and I don't see any reason why it should be different.
Hello. Yeah. Do you see any difference in the way autobiographies are being written over the over the years? We've had great ones like let's say Flying Stumps by Lindwall, or even Hands and Heels by Ian Healy. To this day, how do you think autobiographies have evolved? Have they lost a sense of honesty, or what are your reflections on autobiographies per se?
Well, Kaushik doesn't want to answer that because he's written two very, very, very honest autobiographies.
That is true. I mean, I'm not saying all.
No, I think all cricket autobiographies have to be taken generally with a pinch of salt. All autobiographies, unless they say something terrible about the person, in which case one assumes that is honest. I mean, this is not my line. This is from George Orwell. You need an autobiography is to be trusted only when it says something terrible about the person. I don't know how far that is true, But the fact is that whatever applies to autobiographies in general applies to autobiographies of cricketers or sportsmen. I don't see any sort of differentiation.
No, what I was trying to say was, do you see it evolve? Do you see, whatever, there is always this honesty which can probably be quantified a little. You can say that a particular piece of work is, let's say, the relative honesty, has it declined or is it the same? What do you have to say?
No, I don't know if relative honesty has declined. What has probably happened is the emphasis might have changed. Again, because publishers are so involved in getting the writers to say the stuff that will sell the book, they might ask them to emphasize certain aspects that may not have been so important at the time they occurred, but are important now. For example, when Shoaib Akhtar wrote his book, I'm sure the publishers or whoever was there told him that your book would sell a lot in India if you criticized Rahul Dravid and Sachin Tendulkar. And he did exactly that, and the book sold. So, but that is not to say that what he wrote was not true. But I can't judge, nobody can judge the percentage of truth in that, in those incidents that he wrote about.
Thank you.
Yeah, so much of cricket writing is about imagery, but today cricket is so visual. So how does the writer change now? Because you can't create that kind of lyrical imagery anymore because people are seeing and deciding what they want to see. So how are you going to change this from the format of lyrical imagery?
Well, the question of lyrical imagery is that you assume that lyrical imagery is the same as vision, which it isn't. Lyrical imagery, a poem has lyrical imagery, but a poem need not be factual and logical and mathematical. So lyrical imagery is important in terms of you have to convey to the reader the sheer excitement of watching a game. As somebody pointed out, you are representing the reader at the ground because he, for whatever reason, is not there. So the fact is that you can. I will give you an example. If you go to the Guardian, today's Guardian, for example, there's a magnificent piece on Lionel Messi playing the match yesterday, and if you read that, I think you get a wonderfully visual image of Messi. Actually, I mean, you can almost see Messi play the match, but that's the quality of the writing. That's the talent of the writer, and that is still possible. That is still possible. It's possible that I am not saying that you can write in such a way that someone can actually see a square cut. I think that's a very limited sort of ambition. But he can see the grand picture, which is, I think, more important.
Hello. My question is to Sharda.
Okay, one final question, please.
You have a very unique style of writing, and
Where are you?
here.
Oh, there you are. Sorry.
You have a very unique style of writing, and how far into your career did you discover that you had a style, or did you ever discover that, and did you have any influences? Because of the way you write, it's different from anybody that I have read, at least.
Thank you.
Do you think you have a style, and if you do, how far into your career did you discover that?
I don't. I think I'll be quick because time's up. I don't think you consciously think that this is the style in which I'm going to write. You just write. A lot of times when you're younger, you're sort of trying to imitate people who you write, and then after some time, it's too much hard work and you give up. And then what comes through is to be as truthful as you can when you write. So I think a sense of truth. And I'm going to quote one great Shashi Deshpande quote, which I said, there's writing that says, look at me, and there's writing that says, listen to me. And I want to do the kind of writing that says, listen to me. So I'm quite happy doing that, and I don't feel conscious when I'm writing, but you want to write to share fundamentally what you're saying, whether it's something truthful or something uplifting or something exciting. So that's the two principles on which I work, is you have to share, and you have to be clear and as simple as possible. Thank you.
Time for one last question, possibly.
No, we are out of time, so we have to move on to our next one. But they're going to be around, so you can interact with them. Thank you so much. Pradeep Magazine, R. Kaushik, Sharda Ugra, Shehan, Karunatilaka, and Suresh Menon. Thank you so much for starting off day 2 of BLF on a really high crickety note.